This is ContraZoom.
where we go back and forth about film.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Jeff Fulmer.
On today's episode, we are wrapping up the 2025 edition of the Hot Docs Film Festival, a festival that celebrates documentary filmmaking, which ran from April 24th to May 4th. This is the sixth year in a row that we have covered the festival, which was starting back in 2020, which was the first festival that I actually ever covered on this podcast, so will always hold a special place for me. We have been publishing tons of reviews of films that played the festival, so make sure you check out ContraZoomPod.com to read them. Today we'll be discussing 6 films that we watched and played during the festival. Joining Jeff and I for the first time is Pedro Lima, a writer for ContraZoom, whose work can also be read on Keith Loves Movies, Short Stick, and more. Welcome to the show, Pedro. How are you?
Hey guys, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much for letting me write for ContraZone. So yeah, I'm very excited to talk about Hot Docs. It's also a very special festival for me.
Amazing. Yeah, I look forward to kind of talking about the festival in general. And Jeff, this is technically your second episode as co-host, but I backdated your first episode to number 303, 2025 Canadian Screen Award nominations reactions, which was actually before I asked you to permanently join the show as a co-host. So I guess this is your first. I don't know. I'm calling it your second. How are you doing today, Jeff?
Pretty excited learning that this is my second episode as co-host. That's pretty big.
It is, yeah. The gravity of the situation is felt by all.
I'm sure it is. Pedro, do you feel this gravity?
Yeah, it's an honor to be here in the second ever co-hosted episode by Jeff. So
Thank you all for successfully making this all about me.
Yes, your flowers are in the mail.
I hope so. I actually, come to think of it, that's probably not a good place for them to be. I don't think you should send flowers by mail. Is that a thing you can do?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they tried shoving them in your mail slot, and they just all end up falling apart.
There's so much there's so much junk mail in there. There's probably no space anymore.
Amazing. All right, yeah, like I said, we're talking about the Hot Docs Film Festival, which is a Toronto-based film festival that Jeff, as the only one of the three of us who actually lives in Toronto, you got to attend in person. I'd love to know what the festival was like for you this year. And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, you've covered the festival before, right?
This is my second year at Hot Docs in person. I want to say my second year overall at Hot Docs. I think I
Okay.
might have been vaguely familiar with it 2 years ago, but I didn't go actually.
Fair enough. And how was the festival in Toronto this year for the screenings you did attend?
Really good. I really liked Hot Docs. I go to a bunch of different festivals for a bunch of different reasons. TIFF is always very, very busy. Hot Docs is also busy, but it's a lot smaller. So, on the one hand, you get a lot more. You get a very different crowd because it's only people who are very interested in documentaries, which is, of course, a very different crowd from, you know, TIFF, where they do kind of cater to all sorts. That's neither a good or a bad thing, but you get a lot more people that are very dedicated to whatever cause they are going to seeing. And being that it is a lot smaller, you don't have to deal with crowds as much, and there's usually, you can pretty much get into almost anything you want to. There was only one movie that I wanted to see this time that I could not go and see because it was actually full,
Hmm.
which I think it was called Climate in Therapy. It was where they brought a bunch of climate scientists together into a group therapy session to just talk through their feelings, which was, I was fascinated by that, but clearly so were many other people because you could not get into that screening.
Yeah, that's fair. Now, I have a question to ask. If anyone's been following along Hot Docs within the news cycle, they've sort of been struggling recently with receiving funds and different things like that. What was the mood like from patrons or any volunteers or people that you interacted with in terms of what the future of the festival holds?
So I do need to preface this by saying I did not have a full time job at the time that I went to last year's Hot Docs, and I do have a full time job now. So I was not able to like loiter on premises as much as I could last year. But that said, I generally got the feeling that it was a bit more optimistic this time. Last year, I think there was an underlying vibe of, is this the last Hot Docs?
Mm.
And this year, the vibe was still, not perfect. Like, we're not out of the woods yet, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. There will be a Hot Docs next year.
Yeah.
That never seems to be in question this year, where last year it was very much, you know, no one said it yet, but will there be one next year?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's fair.
and I just want to say that I've covered like virtually, like I live in Brazil, so I received mostly like in press screeners and etc. And I have to give a shout out for the coordinator of marketing outreach and media relations, Maria Didik, and that is the like probably the best PR that I ever worked. Like she has done like an amazing job of like offering stuff and helping with contacts, and always been super like uh not only like promptly giving like everything you need, but also checking out what you need. So I think that uh, experiencing the festival like far from Toronto, I could have this very positive experience of working with a team that is very much compromised with delivering a good experience for press. So it was like really good to work with her.
That's awesome to hear.
Maybe not quite on the same note, but I do remember someone saying, I don't know all of the context of this, but I remember someone saying that there is a buyer for the building or something along those lines. So like, no, but not also not like in a bad way. Like they weren't implying that the building is about to become condos. So I think that they got the financial windfall they needed, like the most important one they needed, and there's still work to do, but it seems like, the situation is not so dire also because of they got the things they needed.
That's good. That's really heartwarming to hear. And like, I know you've only lived in Toronto for a few years now, but the amount that neighborhood has changed from when I was growing up to what it is now is crazy. And if they lost that cinema, that would be a huge loss to that whole community.
It would be a huge loss to that whole community, and I do think it would be a big loss to, I mean, maybe I'm saying this because I'm in Toronto and I have an inflated perception of how important that city is. But I do think that would be a huge loss to Canadian festivals at the very least,
Yeah.
because we're losing not just a festival, but a festival solely devoted to docs that have places in other festivals, but like they're just sort of even at TIFF, they're kind of like a side thought, maybe not an afterthought, but there are some docs at TIFF.
Hmm.
Hot Docs is like where you go if you want to see this kind of film.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, Pedro, sort of spinning over to you. You said that you have covered the festival before. I would love to know your history with hot dogs. Like, when did you first learn about this? Because you are from Brazil, so like this is a festival very far away from you.
Yeah.
What's sort of your history with it, and how was your experience with it?
Yeah, I think it's important to give out some context for the listeners. I'm a writer that mostly focuses on like documentary writing, and I'm a film critic that loves documentary and likes to cover them because I feel that few people does that. Not every film critic gives enough attention, and so I would like in the pandemic years I would participate virtually in very much a lot of documentary festivals. And when I reached some positions of staff writer and documentary editor. I'm a documentary editor for movies we talked about, and I could like link with other people. Some festivals, some documentary festivals became very important for me. So, for example, it's All True. That is a Brazilian festival that I participated for the first time in person this year. But also Hot Docs, because Hot Docs hosts a lot of world premieres, and a lot of the big titles from Sundance and from Berlin and other festivals go to Hot Docs. And also I could see on Instagram plenty of filmmakers there in person for Hot Docs, because it's a very important festival for the documentary season. Documentary season does not work uh, like award season, that is like October, September. No, documentary season is pretty much all the year. Ever since the film premieres, becomes a documentary season, because when a documentary filmmaker makes a film, they don't know if the film is going to get a distribution, if they have to sell to a streamer. So it's a different type of uh, distribution and what they're going to do next when the film is ready. So it's pretty important. And Hot Docs, it's a very good festival to catch these other films that were in Sundance, South by Southwest, Berlin, or last year's festivals as well, Doc NYC. So you can see pretty much a lot of good stuff. And also the festival has changed programming team, and you can see that in what the festival has selected this year. So yeah, I covered last year. I could watch some pretty big names last year. I could see Union and Black Box Diaries, and a few others. I watched My Sextortion Diary last year there, which was like my favorite documentary of the year. So I think Hot Dogs has a very good selection team, and knows how to create programming that makes sense for a documentary festival.
Nice. Well, I really love. I always love hearing the international perspective of, the Canadian film industry and Canadian film festivals. So I really appreciate that, you giving us your insight there, and talking about what it means to you as someone who covers documentaries as thoroughly. So that was awesome. Yeah. All right. So yeah, like I said, we'll be talking about 6 films today. I asked each of us to bring 2 films to the table that we wish to discuss. So let's get started with my first film, which is one called Ultras, directed by, and I apologize if I butcher this name, Raghild Eknar, which Ultras, the heart and soul of football stadiums around the globe. The supporters that will do anything for the team and yields that extra power into the game to help their team win. Basically, this is a documentary that follows a group of people who call themselves Ultras. They are ultra fans of a local football, soccer team, if you will. Sorry, Pedro, I apologize for calling it soccer. Where it is the most devoted section. If you ever see sports on TV, there's usually a supporter section, and Ultras, they're the ones that are leading the songs and chants. They're bringing drums to the game. They have giant banners, all this sort of stuff. And so this documentary focused solely on the Ultra supporters of different football clubs from around the world. And it's really interesting because the people that are narrating, we don't get their names. And we don't see them ever. They specifically point out that they are not showing the faces of the people speaking. And basically, this film is divided up into about 8 or 9 different chapters. I can't remember how many, talking about their local club that they support, what it means to be an ultra, how they became an ultra, and the sort of societal implications that this has. And what I really loved is they really do cover clubs from all around the world. In terms of my notes, I think I got them all, but it was teams from Italy, Argentina, Indonesia, Sweden, Poland, England, Morocco, and Egypt. I might have missed 1 or 2 there, but I think I got them all. And that was super fascinating to me, sort of getting to see how different club culture is across the world, but also how similar they are in the same ways in terms of supporting their teams. I'm a sports fan. Soccer isn't my main sport. It's, hockey, baseball. Those are the ones I follow most than, some of the other stuff. But I do enjoy watching soccer from time to time. Back when I was younger, I followed along very closely, especially with the Italian side of things, because I am half Italian, but not so much in the later years. But I still really appreciated what this film was doing. Now, both of you guys actually watched this film, and Pedro, I think you actually reviewed it for another site, and I think you had very different reactions to it. So Pedro, what were your sort of reactions to Ultras?
Yeah, I revealed for Keith Love movies, and football is very important for me because, as you said, it's not your main sport, but it's like my main sport because I'm Brazilian. Football is a whole culture here, and actually, it's a film that I have a problem in how it portrays. It mentions the violence that like the ultra fans. There is like association between the ultras and violence movements, and I think it does not like, explain enough about the hooligans and how this code it has this cultural violent thing, but also I think it's a like a flaw in the construction. But also I think the film does what it does best is to capture visually like the movement, and it has I image in the Indonesia ultra team that is like fascinating because the camera stops, it stands still, and it films the like the ultras reacting, and they cheering the team, and like smoke, colored smoke, and big flags, and loud screams, and the team making a goal, and the cheering section reacting to it. I think the very these visual moments are very like powerful, and also how it like protects the subject's identity because of also because of this violent aspect that I mentioned. So yeah, it's a film that I really liked. I had some problem with this like the hooligans aspect, but I think that visually is it's a very visually interesting and fascinating like film. It has some very beautiful shots of the team. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the
And
support.
Jeff, I saw your review on your rating on Letterbox. You didn't seem to be as high on this as at least I am. What were your thoughts on the film?
Um, so I think that this is a movie that I wouldn't have watched without Hot Docs, which is actually something I'm very thankful to Hot Docs for. Bringing me out of my comfort zone and like introducing me to movies I might not have seen otherwise. It reminded me a lot of a movie that I saw at Hot Docs last year called Curl Power,
Mm,
which was very well. Both of those movies I found were very like ambient. I mean, they're both sports documentaries, but like unlike maybe some other sports documentaries, it's not clear where the director is going right at the start, and like it's also not necessarily clear, that they know where they're going, and I think that that's really interesting. Just sort of seeing the director sort of um, explore these subcultures and see what she comes up with and see what she can find. And I thought that I think I agree with Pedro a lot here. I think that it was, in my opinion, it was very interesting, sort of seeing the ways that these different subcultures across the world are similar and also not so similar. But I think that it kind of jumped around between acknowledging, I guess acknowledging the political aspect. I don't even want to quite say hooliganism, but acknowledging the political aspect of ultras, and then like going to, these are super fans. They're doing something completely apolitical for their team. There's a bit about, I want to say they're called tifos, which is
mm-hmm.
basically just a big art installation live in the during the game. They do like a whole section on that I found really inspiring. And then it goes to talking about the Egyptian fans in the wake of the Arab Spring, which is also interesting, but a huge vibe shift. And I don't think that it quite goes deep enough into, it doesn't really pick a direction well enough to really get a cogent point across, I want to say, because I'm very interested in the idea that s- football super fans are a political class essentially, and it almost implies that, but it doesn't really talk about that as much as it could, and it sort of intersperses it with all this other stuff that doesn't really bolster that point. So I think it was just kind of unfocused in my opinion. But one thing that I did think that I guess is a sort of separate from this, but one thing that I'm really interested in, and I'll come back to it later when we talk about a different movie, is I'm really interested in where a movie breaks from some explicit or maybe even implicit promise that it makes. And like within the first 2 minutes of this movie, the director says, "You will not see any of the people talking, any of the people that are narrating. You're not going to see them on screen because they're not. That's not the point. That's not important." And she breaks from that right at the end. We see one of the Egyptian fans talking as he is talking. And I think that's just really interesting. I think it's really interesting that she goes and like specifically shows one person talking about Arab Spring, talking about like post Arab Spring Egypt, while she's interviewing him. And I don't know quite what to make of that. I just think that's really interesting that she like dials into that point and breaks from her promise in that point. Um, but like the rest of the movie doesn't fully commit to bolstering that point. I want to say I like focus sometimes.
Yeah, and that was something that I clocked as well. And the one thing that maybe wonder whether or not she was breaking that rule or not was was he the person doing the narrating earlier? Because I wonder if it's just a different person talking to camera. Because the only reason why I bring that up is because in the Sweden section, when you were talking about the tifos, we see these guys, all these people making them, and they're sort of they're not talking to the camera at all. They're sort of talking to each other. And my assumption was none of these people that we're seeing are the person that's doing the narrating for this section. So that's my only wonder.
Which I don't know. I think I kind of wish I'd seen this one in person because I could have asked the director. I'm really interested why she makes that choice because
Yeah.
maybe that's not the person who's talking, but if it isn't, why frame it like it is? And if it is, I mean, why do that? And
Yeah.
either way, it's a very interesting choice, I think.
Yeah. I'll sort of wrap it up here with my last couple thoughts on it, and then we'll move on to the next film. For a movie about football, there is basically, you don't see almost any footage of the actual games being played, which is a fascinating decision. Well, sometimes, depending on how the camera is framed, we'll get glimpses of it, but this is a camera that is pointed directly at the supporter sections, at the ultra sections, and never on the actual pitch, which is so fascinating to sort of have a movie about football and not include football at all. We'll see clips of, people kicking a ball around, or there's a little bit of practice going on, a little bit in the England section as well. We see it a little bit more, but by and large, we are not seeing any football in a movie about football. This is purely about what it means to be a supporter. And then the last thing I'll sort of say is you were talking about these tifos, which is, as you said, these sort of large scale art installation things, basically, where they'll bring these giant banners out. Specifically in the Sweden section, we see a montage of the different ones that they have created, and I literally would watch an hour long YouTube video of them doing these, unveiling these different tifos, because they are absolutely stunning. The one where it is a working slot machine might be one of the most impressive human art installations I have ever seen, which is crazy. So yeah, if you have either of you have any quick thoughts on the tifos or not showing football on the screen, we can sort of wrap up there.
I really love how after the tifos they're like, okay, well, people ask us, what do we do after those? You should hang these up. You can't just throw them away. It's like, oh, well, do you have an 1,800-foot wall we can use?
Yeah.
Throwing it away is part of the experience. You make
Yeah.
sure those 2 minutes go as well as they possibly can, and then you take it all to the recycling bin.
Yeah. Yeah. That was pretty funny. All right, cool. Let us move on to our next film then. And Jeff, what is the first film you're going to talk about today?
So the first film I'm going to talk about is called Coexistence My Ass. I'm going to read the hot docs description here. They kind of go a little long, so bear with me for a minute. It says, how can we both address and inject humor into one of the most lethal conflicts in modern history, which has captured worldwide media attention? That's the looming question comedian Noam Schuster Eliassi faces when it comes to approaching the Israeli Palestinian conflict in her one woman show. Initially setting out to bring harsh truths to a wildly divisive political talking point, Eliassi courageously stands on stage to shed light on a dark time in world history. Using her roots growing up in a blended commune of Palestinians and Israelis living together as a touchstone, she brings forth a unique and powerful voice in front of engaging crowds. As the COVID pandemic hits and the events of October 7th take place, Eliassi goes on a deep journey of self reflection, taking in the impact of these events as humor turns to heartbreak. So I think I mentioned it before. I go to festivals for different reasons. TIFF, I go to, for to experience the wonder of everything that filmmaking can be. Hot Docs, I go to mostly to get really upset. And this is a movie that made me really, really upset. It's a very topical movie. It is extremely current. In the Q&A afterwards, it was many people in the audience and the director and Noam Schuster herself brought up that within 30 days of that documentary premiering, many Palestinians will die of starvation due to aid blockades. And this is as this show comes out, this is probably still like that particular claim is probably still very current. I'm sure that you know, I don't know. I think this episode is going to come out in what 4 days, and by that point, maybe the situation is exponentially worse. It is a very developing situation. I hate it. I hate the way that it's talked about largely in general, and I am very, very happy that there is a growing movement of people being fed up with it, as I am, because I mean, I don't even really have a voice in this, and so I'm very glad to see there's more people talking about this. This is um, I don't know. I feel like I might have said too much already. Did you guys see this?
Yes, yeah. I watched this one yesterday, and this was a very interesting film because it sort of blends her one woman show that's, posits itself as a sort of a stand up routine combined with storytelling. And then basically showing clips, footage of the stories that she is telling, both from her past and from her present. So it's a very unique way to sort of look at how to build a documentary, because it very easily could have just been a live recording of her one woman show
Mhm.
called Coexistence My Ass, but the fact that they also interpolate it with footage from Israel and Palestine and her shows around the world and her time at Harvard and all this sort of stuff makes it for a very, very interesting watch, and one that I feel like is much more cinematic because of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think while I was watching it, it reminded me of the sitcom Seinfeld, of how it shifts from the stand up to like the story. But it is ironic how they couldn't be more like different, because Jerry Seinfeld is a known as very known Zionist, and Noam is a pacifist, an anti-Zionist, a defender of the Palestinian cause. And I think it is a very heavy hitter, because not only because how it portrays the Palestinian genocide, but also how Noam is very self conscious of her position. She is a Israeli Jew woman that lived alongside Palestinians, but she mentions several times in the doc, I'm besides living together with these people, I'm still an Israeli Jew that have the rights. I have everything while they don't, and I think it's a very powerful watch because it is a film that don't dodge a bullet. It goes through like the problems of it. It goes through the conflicts, uh, and also how the Israeli society uh, is living right now. It explains a bit with about the Netanyahu situation and his far right leaning. So it's a very, I think it's a documentary that it's very complete in how it portrays an overall picture, but it still is a cut of non experience and how through this one woman show she's trying to advocate for the Palestinian cause.
I think there's a point in the movie where I don't even remember exactly what she asks, but she talks to her parents, and her parents sort of talk about. So I guess for a little bit of context, her experience, her upbringing was in a small Israeli commune called Neve Shalom, or I believe it's I can't remember the Arab name. Well, I'm going to butcher it, so I'm not going to say it. Um, but she's in this small commune that has about 65 people in it, and it is Israelis and Palestinians living together and growing up together, and like it is a directly and intentionally integrated community. And when she talks to her parents about it, um, her dad says Neve Shalom isn't about achieving independence for Palestinians, it's just more about living together. And her mom responds with, many of the Jews live here because it's kind of romantic. And uh, Noam adds, and her mom resists this a little bit, but Noam adds, yeah, and because of the nice villas and the nice vistas. Where when she asks her Palestinian friend, who she grew up with, Ranin, she says, without coexistence, like I need coexistence because without coexistence, I will be killed.
Yeah.
And, at a certain point, Noam sort of points out it's not coexistence if we have two people that tolerate each other. I mean, now I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, you can't. What is her quote exactly? Coexistence doesn't happen between the oppressor and the oppressed. It happens between two equals, and that's very much
Hmm.
what this movie is advocating for. And I think I don't know, when I watch this movie, it reminds me a lot of movies like No Other Land and the recent BBC documentary The Settlers, which they're all very good, and I'm glad that they exist to shine a lot, to shed a light on what's going on there from a explicitly non-Zionist perspective. But also, it's tragic that the main thing that all three of those movies have in common is that the they cannot exist without non-Palestinian voices pushing them forward. Even No Other Land, which had a Palestinian co director, importantly had a Palestinian co director, not a Palestinian director. Like, he wasn't the only person behind that. That movie exists and got as big as it did because it had Israeli co directors who could, who people will listen to, I guess, for lack of a better term. And it doesn't mean that these movies are any less important, but these movies just these experiences, these stories just don't exist unless there's someone from outside to push them forward. And I think I feel really bad about that because I have not watched that many Palestinian films myself, which I definitely need to get better at. But it's it's frustrating that you don't even hear about a lot of these things without those external voices. And you know, this is a movie that's really good for that, but it makes me angry at the situation. It makes me angry at myself. It's just you know, like I said, I go to Hot Dogs to get angry, and this movie checks all the boxes.
Yeah, I think one thing that I found very interesting was the way Noam presented attitudes towards Palestinians before the how to say this, the rise in attacks and increase in genocide since I believe it was October 7th last year, where it sort of felt like to Israelis that it was like, oh yeah, that's just, you know, that community, cool, good for them, interesting, and it's not really, it's not talked about in a negative or a positive light. It's sort of talked about in an ambivalent light. And then the tone shift post attacks of how angry this made Israeli people towards Palestinians, and the anger that they felt that they did not deserve to exist, which obviously is a very accurate assessment in the way things have been going. But it was fascinating to sort of see where, from my understanding, I don't think those attitudes are a new change, but the way it was presented, it felt like it was a shift in public opinion. Was that something that you noticed or felt?
I think for me, the most shocking part is where she shows her aunt, who, I mean, her aunt gives off odd vibes from the very beginning. But her aunt, who also was lived in Neve Shalom, and you know, is talking about at the very beginning, she's saying, "Oh, you always said we couldn't make fun of Arabs, but that's okay. You know, I don't have anything against Arabs." And at the very end, when an Israeli peace activist is killed by Palestinians, um, that Israeli peace activist's son, his response is um she wasn't fighting so that she wouldn't be killed when they come. She was fighting so that they would have no reason to come in the first place. And Noam's aunt, the person I was just talking about, her response is, "We gave them a chance and I've wised up. I have a better opinion now and they don't deserve peace." I don't remember exactly her quote, but it's
Mm-hmm.
very like immediately violent. Just, I mean, not completely out of nowhere. There's definitely a day that it shifted, but it's I think there's an element of it that's always there, but it's an element that maybe not everyone is like, I want to say, to be charitable, it's an element that like people who have that don't even realize. Like her aunt at the beginning is saying, "I have no problem with Arab people," but she has no problem with a group of people that she is not. Like she has no problem with this group that she doesn't consider the same as her. So she's already seeing them as an outsider group. And then at the very end, she's like, "Well, now I do have a problem with them." It's like, okay, the only way that that can change is if you don't see them as people in the same way you see yourself as a person. So I don't think it's new, but I think that it's like a latent thing that gets, I don't know, for lack of a better word, activated, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And that sort of seems the general public opinion in terms of what they display in the film. A regular sentiment that sort of feels like a lot. And like I would point to the television host as well, where this Israeli broadcaster, I don't know exactly what his talk show is, but would regularly have Noam on to talk about her comedy videos and sort of give political commentary, sort of like a Daily Show type of thing. And then afterwards, we see him being very confrontational about, well, why do you care that they're losing their homes? Like, you don't think that they should? And the Israeli court said that they don't deserve their homes. And she was just like, what the hell? Like, it sort of betrayed this implicit understanding that they seemed to have for, I'm guessing, several years, that she was appearing on his show. And then all of a sudden, he becomes so much more antagonistic towards her that I don't know if was there before or not. But it definitely, the way the editing shows us makes it appear that it comes out of nowhere, so to speak.
No, yeah, I just agree with all you have said. I don't think I have much to add, but the peace activist son, except when he talks about his mother, is very emotional for me. I think it should be like an example for anti-Zionism and why people need to fight it. And I think this is a good addition to the anti-Zionist documentaries on the conflict alongside BB Files and Motherland and the settlers that uh, Jeff mentioned. I also would say Yala Pakur from Hot Dogs too. I think all of those films defend why Palestinian people should be treated and must be treated as equal. So yeah, I just have that to add.
Fair. Jeff, do you have anything you want to sort of wrap up on before we go on, or are we good to go?
I don't know. I mean, I think that of all the movies that I saw there this year, this is the one that I would recommend people to watch the most. I think it is very approachable, especially considering um, the content of the film. But also, I think it's really important because this is what documentaries can do. Like, we could make this film in 20 years and everyone could go, wow, it was really crazy that was the times, right? But like, this is happening right now. And well, this movie is only it's doing the festival circuit right now, so people listening to this podcast can't go and find it right away. But this is one that I would hope everyone should look out for, and I really would recommend seeing because it's going on right now, and the situation is not getting better. It is getting exponentially worse by the day. It is possible that, I just said we could make this in 20 years and people might go, wow, that really was a bad time back then. It is possible that by the time this movie comes out, there is already so little that can still be done that people will go, wow, that really was quite a bad time back then. And I don't want that. I don't want that future, or I like from now. I don't want that to be the case, but um, and I hope it won't be. I hope that people can see this and that people can, I guess, wake up. Is that the right word? I don't know. I'm getting angry just talking about it. So maybe I should stop. But it's a very good movie. This is probably my number one of hot dogs.
Nice. I would say my sort of closing thought on this is more about I wonder what the future of this film holds distribution wise because, we've mentioned No Other Land a few times. This movie won an Oscar for Best Documentary and still, as far as I'm aware, does not have proper wide distribution in North America and still is a hot button issue in terms of it was getting booked at different theaters independently and governors talking about how they're going to pull funding for like the entire state film industry because of it. Like, that's how crazy it was. And this is a film that was winning awards all across film festival circuit, as I said, won Oscar, things like that. I don't know what a movie like Coexistence My Ass is it going to be able to even get in front of people's eyes? Like, this is not a film I think will end up popping up on Netflix or Amazon Prime or things like that. So I don't know. Maybe the only way to catch this movie will be on the festival circuit, or maybe independently buying or renting it from the filmmakers themselves. I don't know,
Well,
which is a very
what
frustrating aspect.
well, one good thing it did is it premiered at Sundance instead of at Berlin. So that, works in its favor, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So hopefully it does have a future and more people can see it because you are right. It's a very important film to watch. But let's move on to our next film. And Pedro, why don't you talk about the first film you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm talking about La Guitarra Flamenca de Irai Cortés, or the flamenco guitar of Irai Cortés, a film directed by Anton Alves, or also known as Carlos Tangana. It is a thoughtful exploration of gypsy culture, an intimate portrait of flamenco guitar player Yeray Cortez, and a hidden family exorcism through music. Anton Alvarez, or Carlos Tangana, makes his filmmaking debut with this documentary. So just to give out a bit more of context, Carlos Tangana or Si Tangana is a huge pop star in Spain. If you know Rosalia, he is as big as Rosalia in Spain. Actually, they they were a couple back of years ago, and so this is important because the introduction of the film is he's talking about his last album, El Madrileño, which was a big success in Spain, in Latin America. It also was nominated for a couple Latin Grammys, and is a very important album for like the urban Latin music in this decade. Is a 2021 album, and he talked in the introduction that when he released this album, he went to a party because he was very popular in Spain. People wanted to be around him because he was famous, etc. And he went to a flamenco party and he saw this idol of him singing for like a bunch of people, but he couldn't shift his eye from the guitar player. And this guitar player was a kid named Yeray Cortez, and he decides to record the process of the album production of Yeray Cortez, which is called Guitarra Flamenca de Yeray Cortez. And it's a film that I'm a big fan of Carlos Tangana, but also I was a big fan of his music videos. He directed his music videos, and I knew he had a good eye for filmmaking. But he does something like truly special for me. He shot the movie on film, so he uses 16 millimeters and 35 millimeter reels to capture the documentary, which is very rare because it's very expensive to shoot a documentary. You don't know what you need to shoot, so it's very expensive to shoot it on film reels, and he does it in 16 millimeters and 35 millimeters. And it's a very good looking film. It has a lot of texture. It has colors. Color is very important for the flamenco and the gypsy cultures. So the red is very red. The red has a dramatic role in the film, and also is a film that it has moments of catharsis. So, for example, the first music act, which is basically Ray Cortez singing and playing guitar in a square with a lot of gypsies, and it appears a woman, and she starts to sing like her heart out, and people start to dance, and it becomes like a cathartic moment, and Tangana shoots it very like cinematic. I wish I could have seen it in a movie theater because it's a film that really caught my eyes. But also like the sound design and the music, and it's all very like emotional, and it is a film about like family. It's not about like the record itself. It's about how the Yeray Cortez is trying to get something out of his chest, that is the loss of his sister, and he does so through recording this album. And it's a beautiful film in my honest opinion.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed this film. I think the look of the film is what impressed me the most. That and the actual musical content. I've heard flamenco in passing, but I've never been an avid listener. I'm obviously familiar with Rosalia, but that sort of begins and ends my knowledge of the flamenco genre. I did go to Spain back in high school, so I heard a little bit when I was there and really enjoyed it. This is a very beautiful to look at film. I think I enjoyed this film's segments better than I enjoyed the overall narrative arc of this film, which is it's a little tough to pinpoint what I didn't care for. All those individual stories were super interesting, but just as a whole, it didn't quite work for me.
Yeah, I think that the last segment, it misses like a bit of the point for me, and it drags a bit. But I think I was so impressed, especially for the first like musical segment, which is like I don't know. I was talking to Dakota earlier. Like when a movie is shot on film, I'm really like fascinated by it. I am a ADHD kid, so I'm really like I have some moments of uh hyper focus on something, and I'm hyper focused on film reels lately. And when I see like the texture, it really blows me off. Like it was like I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I really enjoy like these moments, and I totally understand. But I think the familiar element was also like very fascinating for me, and it has like twist about like the sister, and who wasn't a sister. It was like an aunt, but actually it was his sister. So it has all like this is very like dramatic, and it has like this cultural aspect. And yeah, I was really into it, but I can totally understand what you're saying, Dakota. Yeah.
And then Jeff, you weren't able to catch up with this one, were you?
No, unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch this one. But hearing you guys talk about it, I'm very interested. I'm really sad I couldn't catch it. Hopefully, I will get the opportunity to see it soon. I did not realize that this was directed by Tangana, who I think it's really this is his first film, maybe obviously, and I think it's really interesting that for his first film he decided to do. Um, I mean, in this day and age, that for his very first film, he decided to do something on film, and that he seems to have made from you guys talking about it. It seems like he made some very interesting choices that you maybe wouldn't expect from a first time filmmaker coming in from a completely different art form. And I think that's really interesting. But unfortunately, I was not able to catch it yet. No.
That's fair. Yeah, I think for me, the story focused so much on of Uri Cortez trying to find more information about the woman he believed was his aunt, but was actually his sister. And and while that was a very interesting look at who he is as a person and what his background was, I think it sort of comes at the expense a little bit too much of any other sort of interesting detail that comes up. Anytime his musical career, that aspect comes up, it they talk about for a little bit, and then they quickly shift back to the story about his sister. Um, or his relationship with his parents and how that works and how tumultuous that is. And they'll get into that for a little bit. Then both of his parents will kind of shut down because they're separated now and they're living different lives. So I think that might be a case of, you know, the a first time director not knowing what to focus on more and how to hone in and ensure you're getting what you need to narratively tell the story. I don't know, or if that was Yuri Cortez specifically wanting to focus the story more to being about him finding out information about his sister. So it's tough to say if this would have been a better film or not with a more experienced director, because there is lots to like. As Pedro has said several times, the look of it is just absolutely stunning. You can tell that this was shot on film, and it was done in such a beautiful way. Specifically, I loved all of the musical performances. The flamenco performance that they do in the courtyard that he basically, I guess, was planning to use as a music video as well, showing where he came from, was maybe one of the most stunning sequences in the entire film for me.
Yeah, I also recommend if you are not able or unable to watch the film yet because it do not have distribution in North America. You should watch Carlos Tangana music videos. I strongly recommend Oliveira de Cien Años, which is uh which is a music video that he done for the 100 years anniversary of his football the football team he supports, he loves. So it's a very interesting film, music video. He shoots it in digitals, but he uses like drones and he uses colors, so it's very interesting. You can see like his style. He's a very like uh ambitious filmmaker. You can see it from like the music videos. So yeah, that's it.
Nice. Okay. Well, then let us move on to our next films, which we're back to me again. And the next film I want to talk about is one called The Secret Lives of My Three Men, directed by Leticia Simos. And it is about three ghosts come together to answer a question. How did we get to the Brazil we are today? The Secret Life of My Three Men is a historical drama that questions Brazil's identity in the face of its history and legacy of violence, and through poetry creates the possibility of another reality. So I'm choosing to talk about this film, even though I am pretty mixed on it overall, and that is because the formal inventiveness of this movie is so interesting to watch that I think it's worth talking about, and frankly, worth checking out if people get the chance to see it. But basically, the point of this movie is this director, this woman, has decided that she wants to interview three men that were important to her, but also important to the history of Brazil. And that is her father, her grandfather, and her godfather, and the stories that they tell. And the way she captures it is she cast actors to play these three men, but then she also cast an actor to play a version of herself. So we are already sort of blurring the lines between fact and fiction by having these people do reenactments, because what they did was they learned about their characters by doing research and asking the director about them and all this sort of stuff. And then they were basically performing scenes, improvised scenes as these people, including performing improvised interview scenes. So it's getting very meta. The more I talk about this, it's going to be a little hard to follow. It's one you kind of have to see to understand. But basically, these actors would each get a segment, so it's sort of divided into three different chapters here, going chronologically, where first she started with talking with her grandfather, where he was a member. I need to look this up in my notes here. So he became infatuated with and Pedro, I am probably going to butcher some of these words, so please feel free to correct me at any time. A vigilante group called Cangaceiros. Is that correct?
Yeah, Cangaceiros. Yeah.
Cangaceiros. Basically, the best way to describe it would be sort of Robin Hood-esque people. These people were pushing back against the Portuguese colonizers in Brazil, and would often rob, murder, and do other things to both their businesses and these people. And while they would keep a lot of the wealth for themselves, they would also distribute a lot to their communities. So much in the way you can look at other forms of organized crime, where they're often beloved by the community that supports them. They're hated on a larger scale because of the violence and fear that they would inflict upon communities. But basically, as a young man, her grandfather was fascinated by these groups. He wasn't quite adopted into the group, but still sort of raised by them, and would participate in some of the robberies and other malicious activities that they would commit. And eventually went on the run, changing his name, things like that, and settled down later on in his life. The next person was her father, who was a bureaucrat who ended up becoming an informant for the SNI, which is basically the intel agency in Brazil during the dictatorship years. And so he would collect information and pass it on to the government in order for them to continue in their dictatorship ways. I don't know how else to say that there. And she later found out. Yes, yeah. And she later found out by going through his records and realizing that he was technically employed by a bunch of different branches of the government as a bureaucrat, and none of that made sense. And he would travel to Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil, to submit reports. And there wasn't great document keeping purposely to know who the informants were. So she sort of had to piece things together to herself, and she's making some assumptions while also doing her own research and being able to sort of connect the dots and able to see the bigger picture there. And then the last person was her godfather, who was he was a gay black man who was a photographer. And because he was gay and black, he would often be able to go into marginalized communities, the indigenous communities, the queer communities in Brazil, and take photos in the 70s at a time when these people's lives were not being documented at all. And so he is one of the only people to actually have proper documentation of these people and what their lives were like in their day-to-day lives. He eventually was had his partner that was murdered, and the film gets a little fantastical, so I don't know what the end of his story was. It's a little hard to tell. But that's basically it. Is the stories of these three men. And so we get both these fake interviews, but then we also get reenactments as well. So this movie really does blur the line between real and fake. And so much so that on the movie's website, it is listed as a non-fiction film. It's listed as a fiction film, a fictional film, which is really interesting that Hot Docs would pick this up, because watching it, it looks like a documentary, but it doesn't feel like a documentary. And the film's team doesn't seem to consider it a documentary either. So this is just such a fascinating experiment where not all of it works. A lot of the storytelling, especially the improvised scenes, drag on a little bit too long. It's hard to see what the point is at the time. As someone who doesn't quite know the history of Brazil, outside of, I made a little joke in my review. My history knowledge of Brazil, especially in the dictatorship era, basically comes from I'm Still Here. And that, that's shame on me sort of thing. This movie will leave you a little bit confused at the time while you're watching it. By the end, it sort of makes sense. There's some title cards that really help explain the actual fiction, the actual reality of what was happening to these people and what their stories were. But so much of this is make-believe and left up to interpretation that it's hard for a person who's not well-versed in this era to understand what's going on. So that's my thoughts on this film. Pedro, I know you didn't get a chance to see this, but do you have any comment on maybe information I might have gotten wrong there?
You got like pretty much stuff right. Yeah, as I said, if her father worked for the government, he was like a fascist, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a pretty bloody dictatorship here. And yeah, it's a film that it premiered in Festival de Tiradentes, which is a festival that is known for its experimental films. It's films that are like they are palatable, but they also experiment with form and with filmmaking. So yeah, it makes sense that this film came from there, and I couldn't watch it yet, but I will. And yeah, it's interesting. We are in a Renaissance era of dictatorship uh, subject films with I'm Still Here. We have now the new Kleber Mendonça Filho film that is in Cannes, The Secret Agent or Agente Secreto, that is also about the 1970s. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to watch it. It seems, and I also love hybrid documentaries, films where there's a blurred line with between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, if you do ever get the chance to watch it, I definitely hope we can chat about this, because I would love to get your perspective on it and learn a little bit
Yeah,
more.
sure.
Um, well, let's move on to our next film. And Jeff, what is your second film you want to talk about?
So the second film I want to talk about, I was intrigued by the fact that you said that, or by everything that I had read about the Secret Lives of My Three Men being an experimental documentary, and I thought that it might segue really nicely into the next one. But actually, the movie that I'm about to talk about, while it was easily my at the very least my second favorite. If not, it might switch with Coexistence My Ass for being my favorite. Um, I guess it wasn't really that experimental. It was more of a movie called Always. And this is a movie that I will read from Hot Docs now. Again, they're a little wordy, so bear with me. For Yubin Gong, growing up in rural China comes with a lot of difficulty. Estranged from his mother at an early age, he is in the process of coming of age amidst poor circumstances. His solace and refuge comes by way of poetry. As we observe him learning the art form in his village school, we see how language has the power to contextualize the world around him. Filmmaker Deming Chen worked for several years to bring Gong's story to life, offering up gorgeous cinematography and storytelling that gives voice to a young man's transition from childhood to facing the complicated realities of an adult life. Amid the mountains of Hunan, we get intimate access to the poetry of a new generation, which is reflective of both their uncertainty about the future and of some of the most pivotal moments in their young lives to date. So, Always is about this young man in the mountains of Hunan, in a very small rural village in China, who, when the documentary starts, I believe he's 9 years old, and the director Deming Chen specifically became interested in this village because he was friends with the elementary school teacher there, and he saw some of the elementary school students' poetry. And so he was really drawn to this one student's poetry and used that to sort of construct this film about this young man growing up in rural China and what that's like, going from when the film starts, he's 9, when the film ends, he's 16. It doesn't really follow him all the way because it mostly is just like when he's 9 and when he's 16. Um, but it's really interesting because it's very fly on the wall. There's no narration at all. Deming Chen, the director, says something at exactly one point in the movie, um, and generally it's just sort of exploring, what this kid's life is like, and interjecting poems from that class to sort of give that a little bit of structure. And I think what's really interesting, Deming Chen, I don't know how old Deming Chen is. I think he's around my age. So I'm 30. I'm 31, and Deming Chen is between 25 and 32. He's also around. He's in my generation at least. Um, and so he's not that much older than his subject here. And I think what's really interesting is it's very directly and it's very directly looking back on, basically looking back on this kid's childhood in a way that this kid eventually will but can't yet, because it's happening to him. And I think that when he's showing, what life is like for Gong at 9 and what life is like for Gong at 16, and interjecting these little poems here and there, um, he's presenting a lot and not commenting on it. But I know that I draw from that a very interesting, almost non-judgmental look at that classic, loss of innocence style narrative. Um, to me it feels like he's showing how artistically talented this kid and the kids in this in this village are, but also sort of showing how, I mean, there's an awful lot more to life than art, and unfortunately these kids are not given the opportunity to follow that artistic path. I guess there is some question of like, would they do that? Because ultimately he is drawing from, a fun thing they did one day in elementary school. But the way that he frames it, he sort of uh, he sort of shows that there are just avenues that are not open to these kids in this, you know, small rural town in China because of their upbringing. Not actually because of any, I mean, not actually because of any particular politics, I guess, but because of just the societal conditions in which they exist. I think by the end of the movie, Gong is 16 and he's working with his, he's doing hard labor on his family's farm because they need help. And he's dropped out of school at that point because he needs to help on the farm. So, it's just sort of, it's a very, it's a very interesting look at a normal life that I think is, it's not very judgmental, but it gives you a lot of pieces to sort of put together, put together your own view of, what's going on in rural China. I've seen a few Chinese documentaries and very few that are, well, personally very few, not to say that there aren't very many, but personally very few that are, you know, in rural China. That's a part of China that I don't get to see very often. Yeah.
Yeah, this was a film that wasn't on my radar, but definitely sounds very interesting, and I'm glad you caught it and were able to talk about it. Was this one that you saw in person? I can't remember.
This is one that I saw in person. I had I'd said off air before we started. I was like, if we want to talk about one that I saw in person that had like a great audience interaction and a good atmosphere, this wasn't the one. Not that everyone was like very depressed or anything, but this movie is more of a tone poem, which is something that I really appreciate seeing in person. It reminded me a lot of a movie Faya Dai from a few years ago. Um, but like, people are very invested, but it doesn't have a lot of laugh out loud moments. If there was an exciting audience interaction moment, it was not in this film.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, cool. Pedro, what is the last film that you wish to talk about today?
Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I went to the It's All True Festival in São Paulo, and I went there in the last week, so I couldn't watch most of the competition, but I was there in the award ceremony, sorry. And the film that won, I was expecting that it would be 2,000 meters to Andritka. It was a Sundance, big Sundance film. But no, the film who won it was Riding Hawa by Najib Nouri. I couldn't watch the reprise in the next day, but I decided to cover it on Hot Docs, and I'm glad that I did because uh, reading the logline now, it's a Afghan documentary maker Najib Nori offers not only a love and intimate portrait of her mother Halwa, but also shows in detail how the arduous improvement of the position of women is undone by geopolitical violence. The film follows the fortunes of Nori's family, who belong to the Hazaras, an ethnic group that has suffered greatly from discrimination and persecution. So the film is basically a diary documentary from Najiba to her mother, Hawa. And it is about her mother that had a lot of children, and she takes care of her husband with dementia. But she's a woman that is in her like late 60s, but she wants to learn how to write, how to read, because she was denied that when she was younger. And she decides to start learning that, and she emphasized how she wanted her daughters to study and to be independent for themselves. So for example, Najiba is a journalist and became a documentary filmmaker. She's a director here. But meanwhile, at the same historical moment, when she decides to start learning how to read and write, the United States government made make a deal with Taliban and leaves Afghanistan, and Taliban takes over the country again, and they take all of the human rights back, and the women can go to school anymore, they can work, and etc. So it's a film that is about this cultural shift, but also it is about her family. And yeah, I'm someone that watches plenty of documentaries every year, and I must watch like 200 documentary features like every year. And when you do that, you watch a lot of films about the same subject. So same topic, the theme. So I watched plenty of films about Afghanistan, but this one is, for me, it was very compelling because you can see how it affects those women, but not in a journalistic format, not in that manner, but in a very intimate and hurtful way. You can see their pain, and also there is a important subplot here that is Najiba's has a she has a niece, and she is like 15 years old, and uh the niece does see the family for 30 years because her sister goes into a very bad divorce, and father of the niece takes her into like his cares, but when she's 15 he's tired of her and she like escapes, and it is in the same time that Taliban is taking over. So it is very sad because they can't keep her in the house because Taliban invades the houses to check if there are younger women and force them to marry, and they couldn't have her there because they didn't have any documentation. So it's a very uh, tragical documentary about how Najiba has to escape Afghanistan to France, and how her family changes abruptly. So it's a film that resonated with me a lot. It's a beautiful and poetic documentary, a documentary diary, and yeah, I was very emotional, compelled by it.
Nice. This was another one that wasn't on my radar, but definitely sounds interesting. And yeah, learning about the rich history of Afghanistan is always something fascinating because they have such a long and deep cultural history, especially in the way of telling stories, that I always appreciate watching anything that comes out of that region.
Yeah, it has plenty of good documentaries. So yeah, I strongly recommend this one.
Nice. Okay, those were the films that we saw. Some of the films that we saw at Hot Docs this year. Then was we definitely have a lot more reviews over on ContraZoomPod .com, where there will be reviews of The Secret Lives of My Three Men and The Flamenco Guitar of Yari Cortez. And then some other recent reviews include the Twin Peaks documentary I Know Catherine the Log Lady, the Japanese film A Samurai in Time, and On Swift Horses. Pedro, I really want to thank you for coming on the show today and talking about the films that you watched. Yeah, that was a really fun time, and I hope this isn't the last time you come on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for letting me write for the site. It's really a joy to do that. And yeah, I'm excited to come here to talk about more film festivals in the future. So yeah, thank you so much.
Of course. And Jeff, as always, thank you for coming on, and thank you for being my co-host today, and for covering hot dogs.
Of course, I am very happy to have the opportunity to go to lots of festivals, and so thank you for enabling that. Thank you for making me your festival guy. I know I'm not the only one, but
Always.
I appreciate it.
Jeff, if people want to find more of your work, what's the best place for people to check that out?
Well, right now, probably. Well, I do. I am also the one half of Classic Movies Live, which is currently on Spotify. We've been a little slower this year. We're sort of restructuring on the back end, but we have another episode coming out. Should be the day after this one comes out, I think. And then we are currently in the middle of, I'm going to be able to say this for the next 3 years probably. We're currently in the middle of a giant director showdown bracket. I think we have match 9 coming up in a little over a month. So you have a little over a month to catch up with all of our episodes so far. We're pitting all the directors, pitting several directors who have had their debuts in the last 27 years against each other, and trying to find out by eventually who the best director of the last 27 years was. And we'll get there, but we've got another episode coming up in a little over a month So you've got that much time to catch up if you're not already tuned in.
Nice. Very excited. I always love those episodes. And Pedro, where can people find more of your work?
Yeah, you can find me at Twitter or X, Pedro underline Lima with 2A01, or Pedro Lima letterbox. There you have my links to the Twitter. I also post a lot about my work at ContraZoom, Shortstick, Keith, movies we talked about. So yeah, you can find me at the sites and also my personal ones. Yeah.
Great. I will link to everyone's stuff in the show notes for people to find. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads at ContraZoomPod. Did you watch anything at Hot Docs? Let us know. Send an email to ContraZoomPod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.